second time on our show. All right, our next guest is an artist and a psychiatrist and a memoirist, which is how I met her. Please welcome Hisla Bates.
Can you hear me? Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm nervous wreck, but hope I'll get through this. I'm happy to be here. I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you to all my friends and family who came to support me. My name is Dr. Hisla Bates, and I'm a pediatric and adult psychiatrist. I'm a mother, artist, photographer. I'm a writer, house flipper, SCAD survivor, and an immigrant. I'm going to tell you a story about my heart's journey to find its way home. I had a SCAD, which is a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or a heart attack, about 3.5 years ago. And I didn't know whether I'd live or die. I promised myself if I survived, that I would make changes in my life, that I would be forever grateful for the life that I was given. So I'm a little obsessed about the heart. And I started reading this book called Heart. It's by Sandeep Johar, and he's also obsessed about the heart. And I was intrigued with all the metaphors that we have for the heart. You can have a big heart, a small heart, a cold heart, or a warm heart. You can learn things by heart. You can lead by heart. Some people believe that the soul actually sits in the heart. The heart is intimately connected to our emotions. So intimately connected that you can die from a broken heart. You can even die from extreme happiness, and you can die from public speaking. I found that out. Who knew? It's called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or broken heart syndrome. What's interesting is that a different part of the heart is involved. Okay, if you end up with broken heart syndrome because of grief, it's the apex of the heart that actually balloons out. And if you have broken heart syndrome where you're dying from extreme happiness, which can happen, it's the middle portion of the heart that actually balloons out. And it almost makes you wonder, does the heart have a mind of its own? And when somebody says you should listen to your heart, you might want to pay attention. So let me tell you about my journey. I'm a Kittian, which means I was born on the island of St. Kitts. And my mother's from Dominica, a French island. My father from Guyana. At the time it was British Guyana, South America. And I would leave St. Kitts with my family, and we moved to Guyana when I was 18 months. I have fond memories of Guyana because I lived there until I was 6. And as a kid in Guyana, I had a good friend, Natalie, and we would climb the guava tree in my backyard. And we would eat guavas off the tree. We baked mud pies together, and we'd let them harden and get crisp in the sun. Natalie and I would share our mud delights, and we would drink invisible tea with our pinkies up because we were British. I lived in a house where I could see the Demerara River. I could see boats and ferries passing by. My father would ride me on his bicycle through dusty roads, and there were cows and chickens roaming free. I actually had a pet chicken, Blackie, and Blackie was round and plump. When I was in Guyana, girls wore uniforms, and boys too, to school, and we sang songs in the schoolyard, and one of my favorite songs was Brown Girl in the Ring. There's a brown girl in the ring, tra-la-la-la-la. If you know the song, please sing with me. There's a brown girl in the ring, tra-la-la-la-la. Brown girl in the ring, tra-la-la-la-la. She looks like a sugar and plum. plum, plum. And then we would form a circle around this girl, and there'd be a brown girl in the middle of the circle, and we would ask her to dance. We'd say, show me your motion, tra-la-la-la, show me your motion, tra-la-la-la-la. We were proud to be brown girls. We were happy brown girls, and we celebrated our brownness. It was beautiful to be brown. When my mother and I came to the United States, I never did get to grieve the loss of my friends and family that I left behind. I left a piece of my heart in Guyana. We moved to Queens, New York, when I was 6 years old. It was 1965. And I remember our neighborhood. It was manicured lawns, all green and lush. And there were brick Tudor homes, all lined up in neat rows. And there were no more songs about brown girls. There were no more songs about brown girls, and there were no more celebrations about being brown. I learned in the eyes of some people, being brown wasn't a good thing. Like when my neighbor, Evan, who lived 2 houses down from me, called me the N-word as I was passing by his house. He said, "You nigger." And I didn't know what that word meant. I was 8 years old. And I was new to this country. And I could tell that it wasn't something very nice. And then there was the time when Shelley didn't invite me to her birthday party, and we used to play stickball and ride our bikes together. And I said, "Shelley, why didn't you invite me to your party?" And she said, "Well, Isla, I couldn't possibly invite you to my party because you'd be the only black person there." I was 10 when that happened. Sometimes when I felt sad as a kid, I would ride my bike for hours and I would think about rides with my father in Guyana. I would sit on the bar of the bicycle between his strong arms as he rode me to school. There were times when I needed to be alone, and I would go upstairs to the top of our house, and we had stained glass windows that were at 45-degree angles. And there was a triangular ledge. And I would sit on that triangular ledge, and I would open both windows on either side, and I would look down the street over the tops of trees, and I would make believe it was my castle, it was my tower. There were days in this suburban neighborhood where I lived, times were idyllic, but the neighborhood was changing, and there was redlining, and there was white flight. My mother and I moved to the Northeast Bronx. And when she said we were moving to the Bronx, I was scared. I didn't know what to expect. I had heard that the Bronx was dangerous, and the media portrayed it as a dangerous place where there were a lot of brown people. The media made me afraid of my own people. But when I went to the Bronx, it wasn't so bad. And the people were just people. Now, I was a little nerdy when I was 12, and I was still playing with Barbies. And when you live in the Bronx, you don't play with Barbies at the age of 12. So I quickly learned about other things other than Barbies. I skipped the 8th grade, so I had to be bused to another location that was outside my neighborhood. And I certainly knew, because of my green card status, my brown skin, and my British passport, that if I did anything wrong, I could be deported. I went to college, went to Parsons School of Design, I graduated, I worked as a fashion designer, and I moved to Chelsea in Manhattan, where I had an apartment. It was great, I love New York. And I traveled to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, London, Paris, Rome, Milan, all over Europe for design. And every time I came back home, I would be on the line with the foreigners. And I thought, okay, I've been in this country most of my life. I'm not really a foreigner. Maybe it's time to become an American citizen. But the year was 1984, and there was a lot of unrest, racial unrest in New York. There was the death of Eleanor Bumpers, who was shot twice in her home in New York. There was the death of a art student, Michael Stewart, who died in police custody, and 27 students from Parsons School of Design heard him screaming, "What did I do? What did I do?" And I lived in Chelsea, and 1 block from my house, I watched police officers beating up a young man. And his girlfriend and her child were screaming, "Please stop, don't beat him." And then they got tired of hearing the girlfriend screaming, so they grabbed her, and the child was left alone, and she said, "Please leave my child." And I was in a crowd full of people, and we were all watching this, and I screamed, "Please stop beating him, why are you hitting him?" And the police officer turned and he looked at me and he said, "You shut the fuck up or you're next." And I ran home and I cried. I cried because I didn't know if I wanted to belong to a country that didn't want me, that could just, arrest me or treat me like I was less than because I was brown. But you know what? I love New York. I love New York. I love New York for the ethnic diversity. I had wonderful friends. I had friends who were architects, designers, historians, philosophers. I lived in Chelsea. The fashion scene was booming. There were museums and nightclubs. There was danceteria, there was area, there was a pyramid. I went to all those clubs. I had a great time. I love New York. I love biking through the streets and weaving through traffic like a messenger. New York was beautiful, even with all the dirt and grime. I loved it. So at 24, I decided to become an American. And I'm an American citizen now. So my mother, who was an immigrant, she left the place she loved and the husband she loved as well for the sake of my future and future generations. And I think that's the story of most immigrants, that they leave the home and places they love, they leave family members, and it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but they do it because they want a better future for their children. My mother had planned to return to Guyana to be with my father. And in 1987, he died. And within a few weeks, my mother developed congestive heart failure. Sorry. And my mother died probably of a broken heart. At 28, both my parents were gone. And it felt like the foundation had been wiped out from under me. I felt homeless. I didn't really know where I belonged. And 3 weeks after I buried my mother, I started medical school to answer my calling to be a doctor. I always wanted to be a doctor. And I was invested in other people's healing without regard for my own. Flash forward, July 2015, I'm living in Boston. I'm visiting Philly, and I have a heart attack. And I suspect it's a result of pushing away a lot of grief and loss and stress and not dealing with it. I pushed it into a dark void, and that day I had a heart attack. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed that I would live. I prayed like I never prayed before. And I said, if I survived, I'm gonna make changes in my life. I'm gonna do things differently. My heart told me, you need to be someplace where people love you. You need to be someplace where you can reconnect with them, not just say hi on Facebook, how are you doing? But you really need to meet with people. You need to quit your rat race job. You need to leave that loveless relationship that you're in because it's depleting you. I did all of those things. In July of 2018, I moved from Boston back to New York. Because New York is the place where my heart wants to be. It feels like home. And it took a heart attack really to open the doors of my heart and let the light in. And I just hope that you guys don't wait for a heart attack to open your hearts and realize that we are all human beings. Immigrants, brown people, we're all human beings. And I hope that you will find the light that's within you. Thank you.
Hisla Bates. Thank you, Hisla. Can we have a round of applause for everyone who we heard tonight? We have some amazing stories.